Check it out, a 65 Mustang convertible. We're gonna do some suspension on this thing. This is a car of a friend at church. And he brought it to me and said, hey man, this is a nice car. It's got a lot of new stuff on it. It needs more new stuff. So we're doing rear leaf packs and shocks on the back. Then we're gonna do front coils and upper control arms and a beefier sway bar and strut mounts, that sort of thing up here. If you're not familiar with first gen Mustangs and even Cougars, basically you have a lower stabilizing arm. This is not an A arm type, it's just like a single kind of a wishbone shape. It tapers out wider, comes up skinny, and then it's got a traditional A-shaped control arm up top, like this right here. And then the coil sits on top of the upper arm with your shock going through the middle of the coil. So we're replacing all that stuff. It's already got new steering components. We see some ball joint has been done, new disc brakes, sway bar end links, bushings here. It's got a nice Borgeson steering box, steering gear. All the linkages and tie rod ends and stuff have been done. You know, it's got a new starter. It looks like the engine's been rebuilt. A little drippy. It's pretty common in these old Fords. Who knows if the builder went back with a rope seal or a later model like a one-piece round seal. It's got some real nice exhaust on this thing. And then for the back, we've got leaf packs, shackles, bushings, and shocks. So these leaf packs, I don't know, maybe this was CJ Pony parts, I don't know where they came from. The rear eye is empty. The front eye is loaded. So it's our job to put bushings in the shackle that goes on the rear. So I've got some bushing lube. We're gonna lube these guys up to make sure there's no squeaky and no sticking and stiction, friction sort of stuff. Those will get in there. It's just like the old style, so kind of pressed in one side, big stud with a nut on the other side. So bushings go in there, plate goes on the outside, nut goes out there, and that's capturing the eye of the spring. So what I just pulled off was the outer plate. It's got some 9/16 nuts on there, so we can see it here. The plate spanned from here to here. Pull that off after the nuts. So now this upper stud should just push out the side of the frame. Of course, this rubber is going to be pretty sticky, so I may have to knock it. Unfortunately, gas tank, exhaust is all kind of in the way, so it makes a little bit of a challenge here. Then on the front, we pull this nut off, and then the bolt should release inboard. And then the front should come loose. As you can see, I've got the axle supported on some stands. So the leaves are essentially free, ready to swing down. So let's do this driver's side leaf. I've already done the passenger side, except swinging it back up into place with the bolt. So essentially, whether you're doing this on the floor with jack stands or on a lift like this, you're going to want to suspend the axle. So I've got two tripod stands here. I've taken the U-bolts off of the leaf pack, so the axle is free. The shocks are disconnected as well, so the axle can just kind of move up and down independent of the leaves. And we've got the shackles are held in. It's got a stud pressed through there and a 9/16 nut on the inside. So I'm going to take those nuts off, and then there's a 3/4 inch bolt that holds the front bushing. And once those are loose, this thing will drop out. But what I like to do is hang it from either the front or the back and just let it swing down. So I think what I'm going to do here, just like I did passenger side, take that 3/4 inch bolt out of the front. It'll go inboard to pull it out. Let this swing down, and then take the upper shackle nut off and just wiggle that shackle and spring off of the car frame. this may take a few minutes. Usually I'll hyperlapse the stuff that takes a long time, but I may have a comment along the way. I don't know. Let's see. So I've already sprayed everything with some PB Blaster, and I'm using, here's my just a standard 3/4 inch, and then offset 3/4 to do this up front. Oh, this one's on there. It's also, everything is coated with rubberized undercoating. Yeah, there we go. Ah. Let me bring you in real quick to see. So here we don't really have room to stick a socket in there to pull this nut off. And this exhaust is kind of in the way here. Otherwise I would just put the impact on a bolt and zip it out that way. So I'm just holding the bolt head still and spinning the nut off. This is fine thread. Now you can see all that rubberized undercoating is just gumming up the threads as it comes off. So I just have to keep it lubricated and pull that nut off so then the bolt can come out. I guess we'll go ahead and hyperlapse at this point. Oh my goodness. That one was on there. The threads are just all gummed up, so I had to get the breaker bar, get some extra torque. But the bolt box itself is actually pretty clean. Still gonna brush it, prime it, paint it, because hopefully this doesn't have to come apart for a long time. So you want it to go back together nice and clean. Alright, so now we've got the stud goes in from the outside, and the nut is right up there. It's a 9/16 on the top and the bottom, but we're going to pull the top and the bottom off because that plate has to come off in order for that stud to pass through. So this whole plate comes off, upper and lower nut come off, and then we can wiggle the shackle out of its frame receptacle. Oh man, that bolt did not fought until the very last thread. But now we can see that plate is off, so that we should be able to just wiggle this shackle right off of there. Okay, let's try that. It's going to come outboard. Just be careful on this car, the wire that goes to the backup light is in proximity. Got a little wiggle around here. There, okay. No, there's not. Okay. There. We've got the bushing is still trapped in the frame. Oh my goodness. It's like a beach coming out on top of me. Dirt and sand. It looks like mostly sand. Oof. And I'm just kind of fighting this bushing, wiggling left and right. It's kind of seized up in there. Could be worse. Not that worse. See, the rubber's pretty clean, except for there, where we've got some rust, where it's kind of bonding to the steel. That's why it's putting up a fight. Golly. Okay. There we go. So, I got these things out of there. And they were right here on that shackle, just like that. Outer, inner, and that plate is on there. It's actually spread now. There's a little bit of flex in there. Anyways, nut on each side. And that's the makeup of the shackle end. So what we're going to do now is lube up the bushings that go in here. So we've got a tub of bushing lube. We'll grease those puppies up, stick them on the shackle and on the leaf, and get it hung back up in here after we clean and paint the boxes. It is time to finish this Mustang. So we just wrapped up the front passenger suspension. So basically it was putting a new spring and upper control arm. That's a Scott Drake arm, came preloaded with a ball joint. Yeah, so that's going to complement the steering and new brakes and everything very well. Now I've got to do the driver's side. A couple of notes. Using a spring compressor on coil-sprung, it's always dangerous. Be very careful when you're doing that stuff. There's a couple of different design spring compressors. I'll show you what I'm using here in just a sec. There is a sort of this recessed area on top of the frame channeling that this was just full of dirt and stuff like this, just old caked up nasty stuff. If we look through the window here, you see right back there that little indentation is actually a drain hole. So when stuff gets in here, it's supposed to drain on the inside of that frame rail, but if that gets clogged up with dirt and sediment, then you end up with, you know, a ½ inch or an inch of stuff in here that will eventually rot your frame. So make sure you keep that stuff clean. Really all it takes is compressed air or a water hose, squirt it down in there and make sure that's clear and it drains. Especially after doing a bunch of work like this, you don't want to ruin your car from a little bit of seasonal neglect. Yeah, so we can look here on the driver's side. I haven't messed with it yet. See how it looks flush? You might think, well, that's just a boxed frame. That's what it's supposed to look like. But no, if I poke that with a screwdriver, the screwdriver will go down about 3/4 of an inch. Basically, the top of that box is right here where that bevel starts. So we're gonna have to clean that out and put a little bit of acid etching compound in there to kill any rust, neutralize it with some acetone, and then I'll just spray some truck bed liner to kind of match this black coating. So what we're going to do first is take the shock out. You can see the shocks have been replaced. The XLG is kind of KYB's intro level shock. I recommend getting the gas adjust. They don't cost that much more, and it's a very different feeling shock. This is going to be kind of a factory feel, you know, a little bit softer. The gas adjust is going to be more sporty feeling, but will serve a Mustang very well. Anyways, so ½ inch nut on the bottom, or 13 millimeter. These are made in Japan, so probably metric. And you can stick a extension with your socket up the backside behind the control arm to get the other nut off. And up top, we got 2 ½ inch bolts. This is ½ inch because that was forward, these old bolts. And then the shock will just lift out the top. Then with that out of the way, there's 2 studs on this upper control arm that go through this inner fender. We can see those nuts right here. Here's one, and then there's one, kind of where my finger is pointing, behind that spark plug wire. So those 2 nuts have to come off after you compress the spring. So once the shock is out of the way and you pull the sway bar end link off to free up this lower arm, and then you can separate this ball joint to get the steering knuckle kind of out of the way where it's kind of free floating. That will allow the upper arm to go down as far as it can, just to help unload that spring. And then this is the compressor that I use. Now when it comes out of the package, it's got, you know, these little arms are in there like that. It's going to have a short hook and a long hook on each block set, and basically you turn this 3/4 inch nut and it's going to either cinch that stuff together or spread it apart. So obviously for compressing a spring, it's going to cinch it together, bring these coils closer together, reduce the overall length of the spring until it's loose enough that we can pull it out. And then we'll take those 2 nuts off of the control arm inside the fender and remove that so we can put the new stuff on here. So there's those studs, or those bolts that are pressed through the upper control arm. So the nut is on the inside of the fender there. So we've got ball joint already pressed in. This is the seat for your coil that goes in there. It comes with rubber isolators that are going to rest here and here, just to help keep noise down from that spring movement. So that's a pretty nice little kit. Plus the color scheme is great. So here's the old one. It's, you know, same design. The old spring, you can see, is, so here's the difference in length. New spring is a little bit shorter, but on the old one, that rubber isolator is like an 1/8 inch thick, and this new one you can see is substantially, this is poly or something, substantially taller. So the effective height of the spring ends up being the same. So whenever that goes in, we're going to compress it quite a bit to seat on the new arm. So let's get to it. All right, put the floor jack under the hub, or under the control arm, to kind of raise it up a little bit without lifting the car, and that allowed me to loosen up the lower bolts in the shock, and it just pulls right out the top. You do have to give it a little twisting motion here, just kind of work it out the window up top, and there we go. So shock is out. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the floor jack out, and we will take off the sway bar end link and separate this ball joint. I don't always do it exactly how I said I would. I left the floor jack in there and just pulled the nut off the sway bar end link, so now I can pull that bolt out. You see the sway bar is free now. But if we want to get that end link all the way out, there we go. Kind of falls apart there, but that's okay. And the nut is under the jack. Retrieve that here in a sec. Okay, so now our sway bar is free. I still left the passenger side disconnected because we're going to pull the bar off and replace it with a new bar. So next step is going to be we're going to pull this cotter pin out and pull this nut off. May actually get the nut flush with the end of the stud, and then just kind of knock it with a brass hammer, just kind of jar it, and then get that separator, little pickle fork in there, and smack it to free the ball joint. Now it's time to get assertive. So we've got that nut kind of spun free, it's just hanging out there. We're going to take the pickle fork. I like to put a little bit of grease on these things just to make it slide around that boot. It's probably still going to tear the boot, so if you're going to reuse ball joints, try and get a new set of boots. But I'm just going to strike this with a hammer. I'm gonna go ahead and let all that tension off. I'll let the floor jack down because it's pressing up. And here we go. Oh, that was a close one. And that's it. Now I can spin this nut off. There we go. Okay. So now that's out of the way. Now this isn't really putting any, it's not pulling on the brake hose. If you find that your hose is a little bit shorter, just pull that clip out right there. And then the hose will be able to pass through. And it might earn you an inch or so. Alright, so at this point we're going to compress the spring. And here we are, we've got the control arm loose, so I've already put the tool in there to compress that spring, but I did sort of cheat this time. I had a hard time on the passenger side getting that tool to comply. And one of the problems is that threaded shaft was going to bottom out on the spring seat, so you either have to put the hex on the bottom and just use a hand wrench in there, and that just takes ages to work through the coil to turn that thing and compress it. What I did this time, I just had a timing sprocket sitting around. I just looked for random things. You could use anything, a block of billet with a hole drilled in it, whatever. But it happened to be the right spacing, so I could put these shock bolts through there to hold the timing sprocket stationary on top of the shock tower, and then just pass the tool through the hole of the sprocket, and keep this stuff lubricated with some oil or grease so the action is nice and smooth. And it really saved a lot of time, and it feels just as safe as using these little doohickeys. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull the arm out and then let that spring compressor out, let the spring expand, and pull the spring out. And for getting those nuts off, you probably want a ratcheting wrench. There's not enough room really between the exhaust manifold and the inner fender to get a socket and a ratchet, especially not a 1/2-inch drive. So I've just got my ratcheting wrench on there, and a lot of times those threads are kind of gummy. I've already got one off. Just in here working on that second one. I will say, whenever you get that thing loose enough to where the A-arm is kind of jiggly, like this, go ahead and remove those shims. So they're going to be different front and back most likely. So I've got my front shims pulled out. I'm just leaving those toward the front of the car, and then the rear shims, it's kind of gummy back there. If I can even flip them to let them fall out. They don't have to fall out right now. They can do it when I pull the arm off. But oh my goodness. Let's see. So then I'm going to put the rear shims on that side and just put them back in the same place, and when it goes for alignment later they'll sort that out, but at least this is going to put it back how it was. Got to put those nuts off of the inside, so now it's so close. We got a little bit of interference from the spring, so I'm going to go ahead and keep compressing the spring a little bit until this control arm can pass by. Alright, a little bit of tightening the spring up a little bit more and wiggling that control arm, and we got it out. So now I'm going to go ahead and get that spring out of the way. I don't really want that thing where I'm working in case a tool fails or something. So we're going to unload it, pull it out, and then clean out this channel. Now with the spring out of the way, I can work in here without risk of injury. Now you can see it looks like it's a solid surface, but it's not. It's just dirt and stuff caked up. So I'm going to loosen it up and then vacuum it out. Then we'll wire brush it and put some of that Eastwood acid etching compound. I like that stuff. I'll show that to you here in a sec. Yeah, that one just comes out in one piece. I like when that happens. There may have been some sort of rubber liner. That actually might be what's holding this together. If it had a coating on there that's just separated from the steel. Anyways, let's clean it up. And that's where water is supposed to drain. It was gummed up. I don't know if when they sprayed some undercoating it just kind of gathered right there, but there was just a lump of gummy tacky stuff. So we're gonna push that through. There we go. Now water can escape. Let's see, I can't. I'd stick something from the bottom, but I can't quite get my driver in there. But obviously you can see, bloop, it's cleaned out now. So finished cleaning this, and let's put some etching compound on it. Alright, as you can see, it's pretty clean. So I sprayed it with purple power and scrubbed it and took the wire wheel to it, and then cleaned it out with a rag, and then sprayed it with brake parts cleaner, and then hit it with some compressed air. So it's a lot cleaner, but we still see kind of the rust color on the steel. So to make sure none of that stuff creates a problem later, Eastwood fast etch. I'm just going to spray a little bit in there, and then I've got a brush. I'm just going to kind of work it in, make sure it gets down in that little crack and all the little pits. This is not rusted through, but it is pitted. It's kind of like, this stuff is kind of like chemo for car cancer. Let's make sure we get it all so nothing comes back. Really dig into those corners. Okay, so it's good and saturated right now. I'm going to go ahead and just throw a piece of plastic on it. Try and trap that moisture in there for a little bit. There. Just finds an adequate weight. There we go. Ratchet. That's a good little hold down for that plastic. I'm not worried about it being airtight. Just want to keep that liquid in there for a little while. Okay, then I'll come back in a little bit with some acetone, scrub it down, and then spray some bed liner in here, and then once it kind of cures, it'll be ready to accept a compressed spring and a upper arm. Okay, let's slosh a little acetone in there to make sure we neutralize that acid. Give it a good acetone shower. If you leave the acid on there, it has a tendency to continue working and will weaken the steel over an extended period of time. So really want to use either some Eastwood like paint prep wipe down or acetone to make sure we neutralize that stuff. And now that this is going to take not very much time to dry, I can go ahead and spray it with some bed liner. But you see now that stuff is nice and gray instead of being rusty brown. So rust is dead. And hopefully it doesn't come back. And the truck bed stuff is just rattle can. The duplicolor stuff off the shelf at O'Reilly's is actually pretty good. So let's let this dry for just a few minutes and then we'll get some coverage. Okay, it's had some time to dry. Kind of force dried it with some compressed air while we were waiting. So now let's cover this brake line so we don't get overspray all over it. There we go. We're going to let that cure for maybe an hour, and then we'll stick the spring and control arm back in there. And we're compressing the new spring now. I simplified my approach a little bit, so now I've got one block of the tool just resting in the shock tower. I did have to trim that washer a little bit, that little thrust washer, so these little legs could come closer together, but it rests down in there perfectly now, and I've got my spring well on its way. I just need to get the base of the spring pretty close to where the holes are for the control arm. So do not use an impact on this, just do it by hand. It's going to take you a few minutes. And in about 2 or 3 more minutes of this, I'll be ready to put that control arm in. Alright, actually I gotta pump the brakes for a second and rewind. You see how this coil is starting to get kind of lopsided in there? We do not want to load that thing at an angle. I don't want it being compressed at an angle because there's a risk of it, coming out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and unwind the compressor, and I guess I'll do what I did on the other side. Just put the tool in the spring, compress it on the ground, and then tuck it up in there. Okie dokie. So I've got our spring compressed. I got that vibration isolator on the top of it, and I've got this control arm fastened. The nuts are tightened down on the inside. My shims are back in there. So we're going to see if we can pass this spring up to the top, and we'll notice the end of the spring does have a seat. It's got a stop right here, a little tab, so it has to be positioned right there. The top is relatively flat. Okay, let's see. Try it from the front. Okay, I think that's it. So what we're going to do at this point is slowly unload the spring. So we'll back off the compressor and we'll just want to check and make sure that we're keeping the bottom seated correctly and that the top is centered in that little hat in the shock tower. So from up here, I'll just put my 3/4. We're going to watch, we want this, the stud, to pass through the shock tower. Okay, we don't want it to bind anywhere, but I'm going to have to use my 3/4 ratcheting wrench in here to back this thing off. Oh, and I almost forgot, real quick, go to get that ball joint. I just put that back on there. I definitely want to get this knuckle seated on the ball joint before unloading that spring, because that's going to force that control arm down. And right now, to get this thing in there, you need it to kind of flop around a little bit. So now that that's in place, I'll continue unloading the spring. And I'm actually using the open end of the wrench first. And I'm just trying to get it to the point where I can feel it's becoming stationary, because I don't want it to rock around and be out of center up at the top of the shock tower. So once it's got some force pushing upwards and I know that it's centered, then I can be a little bit quicker about unloading this thing. And now we're at that point. I'm going to use the ratcheting end. Still going to keep my hand out of there. And as I loosen this thing up, I'm watching to make sure that we're remaining seated in the right position on the coil seat. And I'll go up top and peek through the shock tower to make sure that the bushing on top, that vibration isolator, is still centered in the shock tower. So we're good to go right now. We can go ahead and let this thing all the way off. And we're starting to loosen up. Oh, it actually looks like I've trapped the opposing little grabber arm is trapped between the control arm and the coil. So I'm going to have to get that thing scooted around. I can probably just let this all the way loose and then tap it out this that way so it's riding up to the open space. But at any rate, that's just about, we're just about there. You see, this is loose. So I'm going to go ahead and start picking this thing apart. Okay, so I've got this free now, and because I use this method of compressing the spring with the tool inside the coil, now essentially it's trapped, so I've got to take it apart to get it out. So what I mean by that is the stud can't come down because it's going to hit the coil seat right here, and I can't keep backing this. I can't keep backing this out because eventually it's going to want to hit that seat. and I've got to retrieve the top piece at the top. So a few more minutes. Okay, I made a discovery late in the game. It's much easier with that shield off of there, because now I can see the full spring and make sure that the top is seated. I had to take it all off and compress the spring again because the top was off center a little bit. So now that we're getting it centered up, I'm gonna release this compression tool and put that shield back on.